It's amazing to go into Hagia Sophia. I did think Ataturk made a brilliant decision that it should be a museum.
Yeah.
Because that way you get the Christian and you get the, you know, the mosque. It's so interesting to see a church with those huge
great shields.
Shields with the Arabian or the, you know, the Islamic script on them.
Yeah. It was, I mean, it was a stroke of genius, and on the other hand, I think he didn't have much choice. I mean, at that point, there was we're talking the 1920s.
Right.
There was incredible sort of tension and agitation between the Greeks and the Turks at that point. Obviously, and there was a great, huge population exchange and so on that was going on. It was I mean, by taking Hagia Sophia out of the mix, was a great thing. And you know, I mean, if you look at it now, what's amazing about it, I find, you can read 9th century, 10th century reports of what, for instance, you know, the Russian ambassador, the sort of Slavic ambassador from some tribe moving in from Serbia, who would go down, and the Byzantines would very deliberately bring these rather troublesome, difficult people, and they get an embassy from them, they bring them into the city, and they'd be going, wow, look at the walls. And then as a sort of kind of pièce de résistance, they take them into Hagia Sophia, and their jaws would drop, because it's a huge space. It's a huge space. I mean, nowadays, you know, I think even now it seems, I mean, to us now, we're used to great stadia and giant atriums and whatever it is, but it's colossal, you know, and these guys, they said they didn't know whether they were in heaven or earth. That's one ambassador, I remember saying that. And after that, they were putty in the Byzantines' hands.
Fascinating. Well, it is still incredibly powerful. It reminds me a bit of Durham Cathedral and the sheer massive power of the walls. In St. Mark's in Venice, you can go up, as I've recently done, and there are arcades of arches and domes and so forth around in St. Mark's that remind me a great deal of Hagia Sophia. But of course, it was built by one of my all-time favorite historical personages, Justinian, after the Nika riots, right, when it burned down.
Yeah.
And I find Justinian to be, you know, he and I think Henry II are two kings that I've often found interesting in their parallels, but as lawgivers. I mean, Henry II was a true administrative genius.
Right.
So was Napoleon.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, there have been, every once in a while, there have been these guys that come along, then they're big on conquest, but what they really are brilliant administrators. You know, with a great sense of
Well, I think you get that. I mean, what happens, I suppose, is that, you know, what you call the sort of, what we call the ancien regime, you know, these old things, which is everything's kind of, nothing is systematized. Perhaps it was at the very beginning, but over the years, over the centuries, it becomes more and more sort of crazy, and little things are added to it, and little sort of chancelleries and people doing this and that and so on. And the whole thing becomes completely crazed, like a very kind of crooked old house. And it comes to a point where the whole thing's about to totter. And that's when, you know, history demands the man, and out steps, as you say, you know, a Justinian or a Napoleon, who will just kind of straighten everything out.
True. Well, the Greeks held on to it from when Constantine took the Roman Empire there in, what, 330-something A.D.?
Yeah.
His mother turned into a saint, all that good stuff.
English woman.
She was, wasn't she? The Empress
Saint Helena.
Saint Helena, right. And then, through various bits of this and that, it had an awkward history during the Crusades and eventually fell to the Ottomans in 1453, was it not? I never quite understood how it worked till I stood in the Doge's Palace in Venice and saw the way the Venetians earlier had taken their ships and allowed the sailors to climb the rigging in such a way they could get over the walls. I never could figure out how the seawalls were. Yeah. And then I realized that they had basically created these ladders out of their ships. Right. So they could do all that.
And because they were led by the fantastic blind Doge Dandolo, who was in his 90s.
Was he really?
Yeah.
Even, I mean, counting the way we would today?
Yeah, I mean, he was genuinely
not biblical
over 90.
90s?
No, this is real historical 90s. He was in his 90s, he was blind, and he said, you know, come on lads, we're going to do this. And he's buried in Hagia Sophia. And if you go up to the gallery, there's an enormous broad gallery around the, you know, the kind of the gallery around the main space. You can go and look at his grave. It says Enrico Dandolo on a stone, and some, you know, great Byzantinists go there just to spit on it because he did so much damage to the Byzantine Empire by taking it. But what you say about St. Mark's and about in Venice and about Istanbul is really interesting because of, I think of Venice and Istanbul, Venice and Constantinople, they're like the alter egos, or they're sort of umbilically connected, these two cities, and they always have been in history. So St. Mark's is actually a Byzantine church, and its mosaics are Byzantine and so on.
Even the horses. And
the horses, indeed. Well, of course, that's after 1204 when they sacked Constantinople. So that was sort of like, it was like the son rebelling against the father. It was a kind of parricide.
But they were terrific commercial rivals. In fact, it was death if you lived in Venice under the Doge to trade with Istanbul or Constantinople, whatever they were.
That's how Venice lived. I mean, there may have been times when they said don't trade with them, but it was always, that was diplomacy. They were always kind of, and even after 1453, Mehmet the Conqueror takes Istanbul, and it becomes, an Islamic city. It becomes the capital of this Ottoman Empire. They immediately go to war with Venice. As a war, Venice kind of holds its own, but doesn't do, not too great, quite keen to sue for peace. One of the things that Mehmet stipulates, he said, okay, we'll have peace, we'll do this and the other, but I want you to send me a really good painter. And the Venetians sent him Gentile Bellini, who was their greatest painter of the time. And Bellini goes to, goes to Istanbul and paints all sorts of scenes, and eventually paints the Sultan himself. So, I mean, which is, I have to say, is the subject of the third book.
Oh, good. Well, we're
Venice and Istanbul, so there we are.
Absolutely. The New York, the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York did a terrific show about Venice and Constantinople. I think right before or right after Rob and I went, it was absolutely fascinating to see how they lined up art and all sorts of stuff. Well, so I'm assuming that from all this and from the Lords of the Horizon embraced what? It was Ottoman history, right?
That was Ottoman history.
So what time period were you dealing with in that?
Full 600 years. I mean, that was it was writing Lords of the Horizons was was a way of finding an answer to my own question is, who are these Ottomans? What happened that made, as it were, the whole of southeastern Europe move to this beat? And so having asked that question, I then presented that to the publisher and said, can I answer it? And they said, yeah, go ahead. So I researched and then wrote Lords of the Horizons, which is the history of the Ottoman Empire, from 1300 to the early 1920s. And so this is a very long-lived empire. And one of the great questions is, how did it last for such a long time? How did it work? And it ended badly, but it was essentially for a long period. It was a supranational. It was a non-national empire. It didn't recognize nationalities or even particularly races. It was much more sort of religiously divided. And in the end, it was killed off by the rise of nationalism of all sorts, and it couldn't survive. And yet, interestingly, we're all trying to perhaps get back to a world where, perhaps not in the same form as the Ottoman Empire, but one which more sort of multinational groupings can be formed.
Absolutely, you can read Zadie Smith. I was fascinated that when we were in Spain and went to see the Alhambra, people in Granada mentioned to us that under the Moorish rulers, who built the Alhambra, that Jews and Christians and Moors all lived in peace in Granada. And when Isabella and Ferdinand came in and brought in the Inquisition and all, they shattered it all. I think there is a movement. I mean, Turkey, the whole time, the 2 times that I've been there recently, is very much exercised in this whole question of the European Union. It's difficult to know how that will go, but I mean, they seemed both upset that they weren't invited in and sort of proud of the fact that they were, who they are and not. It is a bridge. It is a bridge between continents. It's a bridge between religions, among religions and among cultures. And if you stand right under the walls of Topkapi Palace and look out on that always sort of beautifully hazy, incredible water. You see the Golden Horn going that way, and you see the Bosphorus going up to the Black Sea, and of course below you are the straits you've come up.
Yep.
You know, it's an extraordinary place.
It is.